Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us at RNA's annual conference for this panel, Grassroots Research Funding. We want to say a special thank you to our sponsors, which I will be sharing.
We can see your screen. Okay.
Ultragenics, Horizon Vertex, Platinum sponsors, Gold level sponsors, Grail, and Silver level sponsors, Homology and Stealth. And take a moment for a sponsor message.
What if in the fight against cancer, we had a powerful new technology, a new way to find cancer so it can be treated early? Cancer strikes about 1 in 3 women and 1 in 2 men in their lifetimes in the United States. Nearly half of those cancers will be diagnosed after the cancer has spread. Only 20% of people with late-stage diagnosis will survive 5 years. Important progress has been made in essential life-saving single cancer screenings, but early detection technology only exists for a few cancers. This means most cancer diagnoses simply arrive too late. So to help current and future treatments be more effective, you first need to know you have cancer as early as possible. And at Grail, this is our focus: early cancer detection. Grail's Gallery test is a significant leap forward in the war on cancer and a breakthrough approach to cancer screening. Instead of looking for cancer one at a time, organ by organ, the Gallery test has shown the ability to take a patient's blood sample, applying the latest in technology, driven by genomics, machine learning, and large-scale clinical studies, and identify over 50 different cancers. And if one is present, predict its location with high accuracy. Equipped with this powerful information, doctors have an opportunity to step in and act decisively, potentially before cancer has a chance to spread. So it's time to complement existing screenings and start looking beyond a small number of individual cancers. Because the most important cancer is the one you or your loved one has, and beating it starts with knowing you have it. Grail, early detection of multiple cancers.
Thank you for listening to our message, or Grail's message. Now we're going to move on to Kevin, who is our moderator, and he's going to introduce some of the rules and the format of the webinar.
Welcome, everybody. We've been working on this quite a while and had some last-minute changes. So we've got extra panelists today. I'm really excited about that. And I thank Kate McCurdy and Sarita Edwards for stepping in at the very last moment. It's very generous of you. One thing I'd like to say is everybody should mute their sound when you're not the one speaking until we actually get panel discussion. It helps with those extraneous noises. And for the listeners, we'd like you to use the Q&A box to talk to our panelists. We can see what you're asking, and it's the best way to communicate with us there. I believe that the chat is even disabled, so you won't be able to do it that way. So what we're going to do this morning is we're going to hear from our 3 panelists, all of whom, started from not expecting to be in this world at all to having to figure out a way to start an organization, start some fundraising, start to find a purpose, to start seeking research, for their children's conditions that they found them with. So we're going to hear from each of them. They're going to tell their stories, and then we're just going to have a panel discussion and ask some questions. I've got a list of questions to start with, but if our audience is excited about it and enthusiastic, we'll move to your questions. So Sanath, why don't you go first, since you've probably had the most time to prepare for this, and we'll give Kate and Sarita a little more time to prepare.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me here. I am Sanath. I am a father of a 4-year-old boy with an ultra-rare genetic disease. He is one of 10 in the world with this condition. Prior to this life, I was a software developer all through my professional career. I had no idea or interest in rare diseases. The closest I had ever come to biology was a small stint in my college. And when I started in this journey, I did not know what a gene was, what a mutation was. All of these are terms that I had to read from Wikipedia. My trajectory in life changed on my son's first birthday. Since he was born, we knew there was something wrong with him. He was not typical. He was not developing as you would expect him to. He had severe hypotonia. He could not feed himself. He did not sit, stand, or walk or talk. And so on his first birthday, as I was getting ready to cut the cake, I got a phone call from my son's doctor. She said, "Oh, we found out what's wrong with Raghav. We think he has a ultra rare mutation in this gene called GPX4. And given the rarity, it is no surprise that no one was able to give you the answer all along. But now that we have it, here you go." I felt excited because I'm standing on my son's first birthday party and someone is hopefully giving me the ray of light. I felt like there was this light at the end of the tunnel that I had reached. The doctor followed up and said, "Unfortunately, all the kids with this condition passed away a few weeks after birth. And they believe that my son was the only person living with this disease." I went from the heights of happiness to the depths of despair in a split second. I didn't know what to do. I had to get through the party without really crying and making a scene. We got through the party, and I clearly remember I was dropping off some party supplies at the store, and on the way out and back, I started listening to some podcasts and YouTube videos on what are these rare diseases and how do we go fix them. I didn't even know the word treatment or cure at that point or what it meant. And so that's how I started. I had the opportunity to attend the Global Genes Conference back then in person. This was pre-pandemic, which kickstarted my journey into advocacy. I was also told that there are opportunities for patients to participate in scientific research. And folks there gave me a rough roadmap on how to get started. I created my tribe. I found out the parents and patient advocates that I really, really admired. I started emulating a lot of the work. I started a nonprofit organization. We raised about $500,000 through several rounds of fundraising. We figured gene replacement therapy is the right long-term, but obviously we want to start with something more efficacious and faster. So we started with drug repurposing. I had already tried several drugs on my son just a few weeks after his diagnosis, going down the path of repurposing. And in parallel, we invested in basic science research, high throughput drug screening, and also gene replacement therapy. Along the way, it became clear to me that this is not a sprint. This is a very long marathon. What was also clear to me was my son's disease was probably the last disease on earth to ever get to treatments. Why? Because there are too few patients for any biotech company to care about and invest in building treatments for him. So I started a separate nonprofit organization called Open Treatments Foundation to solve some of the more fundamental problems that are preventing rare diseases from getting to treatments. We initially started focusing on making gene replacement therapy development simpler. We launched that platform with several partners, and we built out most of the platform actually. And soon after the development, I realized this was the wrong problem to focus on. As we gave our platform to our patient foundations, they told us, well, it's great that you help us make our gene replacement therapy go faster, but you know what? I have my call with Novartis in 2 weeks, and I don't know how to convince them to take on this asset, this therapy that I'm building. And I kept hearing this again and again and again. And upon digging, it turns out the root of the problem is that most rare diseases don't really know how many patients they have in their disease. A simplified biotech business model is as simple as the number of patients times the price of the drug. That's their projected revenue. And so if you don't know the number of patients in your disease, you're never going to be successful at convincing biotech to invest in rare diseases. And therefore, I pivoted at Open Treatments Foundation to go identify and count the number of patients that are diagnosed per rare disease. We got funding from Chan Zuckerberg Initiative to go and build this platform out. We are in the process of currently building the platform, hopefully a couple of months away from actually piloting with one or a few diseases. And at some point, I'm hoping that this platform would be a social infrastructure, just like GPS, available to all of us for free for the benefit of the rare disease ecosystem. And hopefully, this will enable more diseases to be put on the map for biotech investments. My son is doing great. He currently is at school, preschool, and he's been learning a lot of new skills, which we think is probably because of one of the drugs that we had repurposed recently, and also because of a lot of therapies. So if at all, one thing that I would leave you all with is drugs are not the only solution to the problem. There are a lot of different angles at approaching the problem, and the problem here being the quality of life of your kid.
Thank you very much, Sanath. It's you and I know each other well from our podcast, Raising Rare. I've been with you for 3 years now and helped see Sanath or see Raghav through to this time. And it's just an amazing story. We actually have a question for you that's like timely, what you just talked about. What have you learned about the ICD code process and rare disease tracking as you started this new venture?
I tried to step into the ICD code land, but I was told that you need a lot more data than a handful of patients. And so I did not go there. I am in the process of handing over the Open Treatments project that I talked about, the Connect project, to a more long-term home that can help scale this. And if and when we've completed with the incubation, I'm hoping to switch my focus on the ICD code problem and really see if there's more of a ICD light that we can build as a community. Because I certainly know that my son's disease is real, and why can't it have a real code associated with it? So I don't know. At some point we will get to it, but for the too small to care about rare diseases out there, ICD is not going to be successful yet.
If I could just add something there, we did get an ICD-10 code for our rare disease, and we found that connections to our European constituents were very helpful because a lot of that activity is done in Europe. So I just offer that as perhaps helpful going forward.
Well, Kate, while you're on the line, why don't you introduce yourself and the disease that you're focused on, and tell us your story.
Thanks, Kevin. I'd be happy to. I too did not expect to be in this field at all. I have an MBA and was working in the corporate world when our son was born with a rare disease called Barth syndrome, B-A-R-T-H, which is a genetic mitochondrial and metabolic disease with features such as cardiomyopathy, neutropenia, so that we have immune system issues, skeletal muscle weakness, GI problems, profound fatigue, delayed growth. Our son was born in 1986 and died in 2014 at the age of 28 as one of the oldest living with our disease. When he was born, we knew something was wrong pretty much right away, not literally right away. In the delivery room, he was great, got released from the hospital, but he also did not meet some of his development milestones, although he seemed alert and engaged and all that. But life really changed when he was 2 and he went into heart failure. So at that point in the beginning, we were really alone. We didn't know anyone else with this disease that had no name. Our son's doctors didn't know anything about it or know anyone with the disease. But they did find one paper that was written by a doctor named Dr. Barth, which is why it's now called Barth syndrome, from the Netherlands. And so the genetic people in the hospital wrote Dr. Barth and said, you know, there's no family history here. What do you think about this diagnosis? And by the way, the 5 patients that you've mentioned in your paper, can you tell us what treatments they're on and how they're doing? And we got a very formal letter back from Dr. Barth, because the Dutch are very formal people, saying we regret to inform you that all of the patients in our paper have died. And the last one while playing at home. So we thought that our son was the oldest living in the world. We didn't know what to do. There was no gene known at the time, though the patients in the Netherlands clearly were all in one family and clearly indicated it was familial. The gene was discovered in 1996, but there was no commercial test for it. So we kept looking online and just seeing what we could find. And actually on Thanksgiving Day in 1999, my son put, you know, 3 of his characteristics into an old search engine that doesn't even exist anymore. And up popped 3 women's names associated with a lab at Johns Hopkins. And he came running downstairs. So he was 13 at the time. He came running downstairs and said, Mom, well, running as much as he could run. I found these 3 ladies. I want to talk to them. Will you help me write an email? Because I know I'm not allowed to write people I don't know on the internet. You know, it's back in those days. And it turned out we didn't know who these people were, if they were lab people, if they were parents. It turned out they were all mothers. And within 24 hours, he had heard back from all 3 mothers and 2 of their sons. And it was just an amazing day. And it seemed very, very telling that it was on Thanksgiving. So these 3 mothers were deciding to gather anybody like us that had found their names and gotten in touch with them. And we met in June of 2000 at Johns Hopkins. And at that meeting, 5 of us, 5 parents, decided to start a foundation. Most of the 5 wanted to be a family support group, which we all thought was vitally important because we had felt so much alone. And now we'd finally begun to find each other. But my husband and I also wanted to make some scientific progress because we thought, you know, it's great for us to share information, but we need to get doctors and scientists involved. So, of course, one finds quickly that when one makes a suggestion, one is often put in charge. So I was deputized to, okay, fine, go start a scientific program, which I thought, okay, how am I going to do this? Like, you know, like Sanath, my exposure to science had been at the dinner table because my father was a doctor, but that was about it. So we quickly learned that the way to do it, it echoes what Sana said. You reach out to others. You know, there are a lot of other people who've been down this road, all with different diseases, but it's a common road. And we were lucky enough to find some very giving people of their time and expertise, and we learned a lot. And so we started this foundation and we started a scientific and medical advisory board. We held our first conference, just sort of piecing things together. And I would say that there's nothing really quite as compelling as a motivated parent or patient. And you really shouldn't underestimate yourselves. We decided very early on to be clear and professional because we wanted to be trusted. You know, who were we? We were just parents. But nothing succeeds like success. And if you have a few successes and you become trustworthy, it really helps. So we said early on that, you know, we were just lay people. We needed to always focus on what we could do as lay people to catalyze advancement. We don't have a lab, we don't have degrees, so what could we do? Well, we could bring people together. We could find out what common tools perhaps they could use and focus on those, because then we could leverage one tool for a bigger population who was interested. we decided that furnishing opportunities for collaboration was really important. And we learned early that de-risking very early work, particularly in ultra-rare diseases, is really important because, as Sana says, there is no biotech who's interested in focusing on a few patients. But if you can get a project a little bit farther along, then maybe it becomes a little more interesting. So de-risking things early. And we also learned that leveraging what small funds we could raise was really important. So we keep kind of a barometer of, if we spend $1 on an early project that then gets NIH funding later, you know, that's funding for our disease too. We didn't have to raise the money, but we call it the multiplier effect, and we keep track of what our multiplier is, and it's now up above 6. So for every $1 we spend, there's at least $6, and it's even more now that we're in clinical trials, but we get $5 or $6 at least in outside funding for our disease. And that's a really important thing. And that makes donors more interested in giving money to us too. So, moving beyond the founders who are all immediate family is really tough. We've been at it now for 22 years. And we kind of think of concentric circles, I would say. It's very hard to leap from immediate family members to bankers and lawyers and people who have no association with your disease. You have to think of what connections they might have. So are there godfathers? Are there college roommates? Are there, somebody who would have an association with your disease through you or some of your families and be interested in giving their expertise? And we very readily put together sort of grids of expertise we were looking for and tried to figure out how we could get to some of those people. So we're now at the stage of proactively working on research and development. We've had a grant program for a long time, but we're now really dealing with cutting edge science and regulatory issues. And if we're lucky, soon we'll face some payer issues. But we're learning at this stage that not only do you need to bring along scientists and doctors, but you really need to bring along patients, which we've always done. Patients have always been our core and always will be. But guess what? You need patients to participate in clinical trials, or else nothing's going to occur, no matter what science and medicine you've done. So I guess just in summary, I would say we've learned that you just put one foot in front of the next. You think about what you can bring to the table, which is a lot, actually. Have high standards, and boy, collaborate. It's a lot of work. But as I said earlier, nothing succeeds like success. And the only last comment I would make is just never give up, because there are moments that can be dark and you feel like you're looking from the bottom of a barrel, but keep at it, just one step at a time. So those are my initial thoughts.
Thank you, Kate. That was very good. And one of the things that I took from our discussion earlier this weekend and from this is the skills that those 5 people brought to the table. You leverage them, you use them. So when you said, oh, we had an expertise grid that we want, I can just see you coming up with an MBA-like grid that would do that. That's the kind of preparation that we collectively have, but individually may not. And that's why it's so important to collaborate. So
and look outside your team too. Look outside at other disease groups, just as Sana said. People are very giving, and we are asked all the time, people just starting out, and we're happy to help, just as others were for us. So we stand on each other's shoulders happily. We're all in this together.
Absolutely. So Sarita, if you could tell us your story about your little guy.
Thank you, Kevin. So I am Sarita Edwards. Our son Elijah is our 5th child. We learned of Elijah's diagnosis in utero. I was around 22 weeks pregnant when we got our diagnosis. At that time, our medical team told us that he would pass away in utero during the delivery process or shortly after birth. Over the transition of the pregnancy, about 28 weeks, I found myself on bed rest, And at about 30, 31 weeks, our medical team said that they wanted to transition us to a different facility because they didn't think the hospital where we lived could accommodate what we were dealing with. And so we started to commute 2 hours one way for OB care, and ultimately delivered by induction at 39 weeks. You know, that facility was a research facility. We were hopeful that we would hear a different narrative, but unfortunately we didn't. The conversation was the same. You know, if he survives delivery, he'll pass away shortly after. We were denied medical care. We were told because of the high mortality rate of Edwards syndrome, which is our disease group, our disease affiliation, is also known as trisomy 18. We were told because of the high mortality rate that we did not need any interventions. We should just enjoy our time with him. We were not given newborn screening. Everything was withheld. We were sent home post-delivery in hospice care. We stayed in hospice care for about 7 months, and we aged out. And our hospice team said that because we were interested in pursuing life-sustaining measures for Elijah, they could not restart our hospice care, which was totally fine with us. We were in hospice care because that was the only option that we were given. Elijah turned 2 when he was 2 years old is when we decided to start a foundation. And ultimately, I think our decision to do that was because though Elijah was still alive and now 2 years old, the conversation with our medical team stayed the same, and no one was interested in learning more about this rare disease. No one was interested in trying to help us find answers. We found state agency programs that we could have been utilizing that they were just not shared with us because of the mortality rate of the diagnosis. We were able to start one for 1 year that we learned once we got into the program we could have had for a total of 3 years. And so we felt like starting a foundation was the best way to try to remove some of these challenges for families coming behind us. Elijah continued to thrive and do well, and we found ourselves having to coordinate his care. My background prior to starting the foundation is healthcare administration and operations, and so I knew a lot of healthcare language. I knew the administrative side of healthcare. I knew, how to call a doctor's office and explain what we were going through and ask for an appointment. And so that's what we started to do. We started sifting through his medical records and calling different specialists ourselves to get appointments because nobody was helping us coordinate that. We were told prenatally that Elijah was missing 3/4 of his brain, that his esophagus was offline, that his heart valve was not connected. They did determine VSD. We were told that he had liver issues, kidney issues, rocker bottom feet, low set ears. If you Google search the diagnosis, something they told us not to do, but of course we did. Everything that you find is what they told us to expect. And we couldn't even get, someone to confirm a lot of that for us. And so we felt like our backs were up against the wall. And I think, like the other panelists have shared, when you find yourself in that place, you try to figure out, how do I get my back off the wall? How do I start conversations myself with medical professionals and in the healthcare space? How do I get people interested in wanting to know more about this disease? And at that time, it was just about Elijah. How do we learn more about what we're dealing with as a family? We thought about the single mom We thought about the first time mom. You know, he was our 5th child. So we knew what to expect for a child. We knew what to expect post-delivery. We knew what tests should have been done. And we knew a lot of questions to ask, simple things. My husband had to ask them to give him a bath. I had to ask for formula because they just felt like it wasn't necessary. And so initially, the foundation, the goal was to be bereavement support because we were told that Elijah would pass away. We thought, how do we remove the burden from families of having to bury your child? How do we help navigate that journey for families? And we felt like starting a foundation was the best way to do that. I actually reached out to several life insurance companies, including our own, and quickly realized that, you know, a lot of them don't cover funeral and burial expenses if your child doesn't live a certain length of time. Ours specifically was 6 months old. Others that I called, I think the least amount of time that they would help families cover that cost was 14 days. And so we wanted to remove that burden from families. As Elijah continued to live, we just found ourselves expanding as an organization. You know, we just continued to shift and transition because he was showing us in his life how we needed to put this information before other families, but also the healthcare professionals. And so as he continued to live, that's what we did. And we quickly saw how we needed to share our story with Elijah to raise awareness about the diagnosis, because a lot of families, they don't want to share their stories, which is totally understandable. But we felt like, eventually we felt like it was a difficult decision to do it. But we felt like sharing our story was a way to kind of spark interest. And so, so we did that. We started talking about it more. We started, you know, like Kate said, we started collaborating and finding other organizations that, you know, were looking to shake the foundation of the healthcare system. It was really important, you know, not necessarily to stay in the trisomy 18 family, because there were, you know, other organizations present. We didn't want to reinvent something that was already being done. But in reaching out to those organizations to see, you know, what are you guys working on? This is what we felt like we could have used. You know, one gave us their blessing and said, you're trying to do things that we're not. And now they send us patients because folks are looking for information. You know, you don't hear back from everybody, which is understandable. I mean, though it's a nonprofit space, there is some level of competition still. And so we recognize that, and we don't push that narrative. We don't force those collaborative conversations. We understand. We understand. And so Elijah is now 5 years old. He's in kindergarten, and he is doing very well. Our geneticist, who we were able to connect with when Elijah was 10 months old, he honestly shared with us that he has no idea why Elijah is doing as well as he is. In all of his career, he has not seen a trisomy 18 baby respond like Elijah is responding. And so that has moved us into a conversation of research. To our knowledge, we have not found any organization or platform anywhere looking at trisomy 18, not as a diagnosis. We have found some information where trisomy 18 is associated with the non-invasive prenatal test and things like that. But we want to look at trisomy 18. Clearly, there is something that we're missing if 5 to 10% statistically live past their first birthday with severe challenges. And Elijah has severe challenges. He is nonverbal. He uses a wheelchair and a gait trainer for mobility. We see about 18 specialists for him. We have to commute 2 hours one way for a lot of his care, but he's here and he's doing well. And to us, that's enough to have a conversation. And so, so that's our journey and how we started in the nonprofit space and now hopefully exploring the research space. We've had great conversations with researchers and scientists. One of the biggest things is the viability. So we don't want to waste a lot of time going the wrong direction. So we're trying to have conversations proactively about the directions that we need to go to better understand trisomy 18. And that's where we are. So we're always happy to share our journey and Elijah with anyone who will listen. I think I champion Saneeth and Kate in saying that, for us as parents, there's a sense of urgency because we want to know this diagnosis ourselves. And for us as the parent, what better way to understand is, than to get a group of people to help us with that. And so we stretch ourselves past the parents and pull in the scientists and the researchers and the geneticists and the healthcare systems, because they are the ones who are going to help us move the needle. So really excited to be a part of the conversation, and I'll turn it back over to you, Kevin.
Great, thank you, Sarita. As you just heard, we got 3 parents here who are different stages of their journey, coming from different directions, different conditions that brought them, to this point. And so I'm interested in hearing all of you talk about this. And as I've said, I want this to be kind of an open discussion. And we've got some questions through. I'm gonna start kind of at the general level and then get more specific or more advanced, I guess, as we go. So the first one, it's come in a couple different ways, is for people who are find themselves in the position you found. So it's a new patient, a new parent, caregiver of a rare disease. It can be hugely overwhelming. What should be their first step? What do you do to get moving?
I would first look after yourself and your kid, and I think it just starts there, right? Like, it seems selfish, but the selflessness has to come after you've selfishly gotten yourself into a stable state. And so that starts with advocacy with your medical team, getting the right professionals involved. It took us a while to find the right doctors. We had to move cities to get the right care that we wanted, and we are now extremely happy with what we get here. But it was not easy. Like, we had to change jobs, move cities. It took us 4 years to get here, and that's the process that you have to go through. So I would question the system and try to find the right care that you can, and then those 2 principles then apply to other things like research or insurance or other parts of your journey that you think are unfair.
I would really echo what was just said. I think it absolutely take care of yourself and your child. And one of the best ways to do that is to try to find the right team. And it does take a while. We went through quite a few doctors before we got doctors, first of all, who would speak to each other. Barth syndrome, like many others, is a very complex disease, and there is no one doctor you will deal with. We dealt with, Sarita was saying how many specialists they see. I think my son saw, 16 different specialists in 4 different institutions, and we're lucky enough to live in a place where we could do that. But you need to put a team together, and then communication between them and with you is absolutely key. And somehow you need to work your way to having a seat at that table with the doctors, which is also not all that easy to do. But your child better than anyone else, and you need to get to a point where they realize that too. And they will want your input, and they will listen to you when you raise a red flag that something isn't right.
And I have to agree. I think it really starts with, taking care of yourself and really processing, what you're dealing with. I think to receive a diagnosis, whether in utero or after your child is born, um, it's difficult. And I think you have to allow yourself to process what you're dealing with, and then figure out what it all means. I think sometimes we accept what we've been given, and when we are up against the healthcare system, sometimes we feel like we can't ask questions or push back. And that was something that I had to learn was okay. Like, I didn't have to just accept what they were telling me. I didn't have to just accept what these outcomes, what they think the outcomes were going to be. And so I think for me, that was a part of my self-care, just really recognizing that even though they're telling me this, I can question that. I can ask, why do you think this is the case? They offered us a G-tube, and we asked, why do you think he needs it? And it was really because they wanted to make things easier for us. And that just wasn't good enough, because feeding him by mouth wasn't difficult for us. It was a process, it was a task, but it was something that we were okay with doing. And so I think just being okay with pushing back if you feel that you want a different outcome. Be okay with questioning that, and not just accept what the doctors say just because they're the doctor. It's okay to question what they give you.
I heard
That sometimes does go a little bit too far, and you get your doctors pissed off, but you can always change your doctor.
I was listening to a podcast recently, and I just looked up the name. Tracy Dixon Salazar was talking about, you find out there's something wrong with your kid, but they don't know what it is, or maybe they do, but they don't know what treatment. You start fighting for that treatment. You put all your energy there. And she said the first thing she would try to tell people is, manage yourself, just as you guys said. How do you manage life with this? Don't worry about changing the situation as much as figuring out, how do we live with a situation? Because that other thing, finding those treatments, figuring out the science, building the team, that's a long-term process.
Yeah.
Every day you have with your child is a day, and so make that the first priority, and that longer term plan can unfold next to it. So another question here was around raising awareness, both in the medical community, but publicly. And I think trisomy 18 probably has more patients, and people understand a chromosomal issue, because there's other diseases that are near it, but Barth syndrome is pretty rare. Few hundred people in the world, and Sanath, you're down in single digits, or at least in up to 10 patients known. How do you raise awareness from nothing?
I know for me, oh, sorry, Kate. Yeah, I know for me, completely different than Kate and Sanath. I mean, you're right. There is a bigger narrative around trisomy 18. I think for us, our goal in raising awareness, just talking about it more, was because the narrative that was present, everybody was saying the same thing. And we wanted something different. We wanted a different narrative. We understand the narrative that, these babies don't survive. We understand the statistics around the current narrative, but how do we change that narrative? And so I think for us, raising awareness was about showcasing something different. This is our situation. This is our son. What is it about what trisomy 18 is doing in his body that's making him thrive differently? That's something to explore, because it's different than the narrative that's present. And so for us, you know, raising awareness is opportunities like this to share, is you know, speaking with healthcare teams and talking about it. We also raise awareness legislatively. We advocate on legislative policies, and that's an opportunity to raise awareness. And so I think it's really about your comfort level and how much you want to share of your story, but then to what degree of awareness you want to take it. And I'll let Kate and Sanat speak because their numbers are way smaller than ours.
Kate, you want to go next?
Sure, I'll try. We think of awareness sort of in several planes. One is in the scientific and medical community, because like Sanath said, we realized early on that finding patients, diagnosing and finding patients was going to be key to our progress. So we cared a lot about the scientific and doctors knowing about this. So we thought one of the best ways to do it was to fund just little seed grants, is all we could do in the beginning, to get some scientific papers written. And that, you know, that becomes a stone that gathers moss and explodes, because then the authors give presentations, and we've asked each of them to be ambassadors. And as soon as someone writes a paper about our disease, we put them on our mailing list and bring them into our community. So that's one angle of awareness. But then the general public is another. That's another way to find patients. We were lucky enough to get an article in Reader's Digest many years ago, which has many million circulation, particularly back then, and is left in every dentist's office and that kind of thing. So it carries on, which is great. And then we were lucky enough to get a segment on the Today Show. So all those things build, and we did actually find patients from both of those. Not many, but since we only have under 300 in the world, 2 or 3 at a time is a good increase. And then we're also venturing into the regulatory and legislative world that was just mentioned by Sarita. So I think there are a couple of different ways of dealing with awareness.
I love that you mentioned Reader's Digest as, hold it, I've never heard that before. There's, you know, you get out into the really general public then. And people who may just say, wow, I care about this, even if I'm not affected, I'm going to do something and follow up with you. That's just an amazing idea. Go ahead, Sanath.
I am the wrong person to ask this question because I did not find a lot of patients and I did not really invest in this process. I gave up. I gave up and did not give up. So both ways. So I gave up my fight to finding individual patients with this disease because I was too. Every time I found these patients, I felt an obligation to help them, and I couldn't. I couldn't give them the solution that they were hopefully hoping for. I couldn't even give them hope because I knew that this journey is not a journey that I can promise a drug or a treatment for anyone in a good span of time. And so partially I realized, well, if I can help my son first, I can help others. I'll focus on my son. And that's what we've been doing with the N of 1 treatment options. But on the other side, I realized this search is going to be a lot more efficient if I actually span the entire rare disease ecosystem. I'm looking for a needle in a haystack here, right? If there are 10 patients among, I don't know, 6 billion people on the world, that is certainly a needle in a haystack problem. And so can I, rather than looking for 10 patients, can I put out the net looking for the 400 million rare disease patients out there? And maybe I will actually have a better luck finding my son's patients. That's what I started doing with Open Treatments Foundation. So in my own way, it's a quirky way of finding patients and raising awareness for my son's disease. But you know, everybody's solution is different and different to their circumstances and their disease's circumstances.
So a question came in, and Sarita and I were just chatting about it offline, but I'd like to answer it live, which is, you find you and your partners balance the care for your loved ones. And she says, and hi, Brittany, thanks for being here. I find myself doing a majority of the medical cares. Sometimes I think it's because the one thing I can control in the midst of all this uncontrollable stuff. Any advice on how to share the cares? Sarita, you were going to go for it. So
Yeah. So for us, my husband and I, we knew that caring for Elijah would be my priority. As many families do, one parent leaves the corporate world, and it was me. So I left my career to make caring for Elijah my priority. My husband still works a corporate job. He's our provider. I think, when it comes to sharing the care, I think initially, because of the diagnosis and what we were dealing with, I think I wanted to. I was very protective and very guarded, because I had not let myself move past what the doctors were saying. And so I think I hoarded Elijah a little bit. I think when I began to open up and let my husband come in, let the other children come in, is when that care from other people started. I do take Elijah to pretty much all of his doctor's appointments because it's just more convenient for me to, since I'm the one who I run the nonprofit from my home. So it's just, I have a greater sense of flexibility. But I do, let my husband help. He helps, with Elijah's meals. We have to peer rate every single meal. He helps, with bath time. Elijah's learning to take a few steps and crawl and do things more independently. So he helps with all of that. I think if it's not coming authentically, and you feel like it's something you need, I think that's something worth communicating. I think it's just super easy to just have a conversation and just say, I want you to be a part of this, and see if you can get. And that's not to say that your husband isn't. I think it's a great question. Just generalizing, if or your partner, if wanting that support of your partner or spouse, I think, and you're not getting it, I think it all starts with just having a conversation to let them know that you'd like that support, that you'd like that assistance. And I would even tell them why. And so for us, I think the balance is me recognizing that I'm going to do a lot of it because of the flexibility in my schedule versus his, but also creating the opportunity for him to give it as he's able, and welcome it when he does.
I'm gonna answer this too. So this is a great question. I don't think there's a silver bullet solution here, but here's my formula. And just like you, Sarita, I'd been hoarding all of the doctor's appointments since he was born, and now I'm starting to let go. And in reflection, I think there's a pattern here. So if there's a lot of thinking to do at the doctor's appointments, right? It's very ambiguous. You don't know what to expect. You have to ask a lot of poking questions to the doctor, and you sort of need to develop that sort of a muscle over time to be able to deal with these doctors. Then I take it. But if there's a lot of doing, right? If I can articulate what to do at the appointment, if the outcome is going to be the same irrespective of who deals with it, I'll let my wife do it. So I take the thinking once, and now my wife deals with the doing once.
Okay,
that's really interesting. That's sort of how we did it. I too stopped my corporate job, and my husband had a big corporate job and was traveling a lot and just couldn't do a lot of it. But I think by demeanor, I'm better suited for the doctor's appointments too. And we actually found, because there were so many subspecialists and because there were multiple institutions, it actually was vital to his care that one person be at every appointment, because we literally were the only people with all of his medical records. This was, pre everything being online. I have everything. I had it charted. I knew it backward and forward, and doctors started to really rely on me. And several hospitals said to me, would you please go to our medical records department, because the way you keep these records is what we need to do, because you've digested it. You've done charts, you've done graphs, so I thought that was actually really important. But my husband was very involved. And actually he came up with these words, and I'm sorry if they're sort of gender specific, although in this case they're reversed, but he said, really, you're the doctor and I'm the nurse. So he did a lot of the hands-on care while I was doing the more cerebral piece of it. And I did plenty of hands-on care, but that's where he could help and really add value. But I also want to make one other comment, which was mentioned a little bit in passing earlier. Having a patient like this affects the entire family. We had a real light bulb go on early on. We were trying to talk about our patients, if you will. But when the boys, and most of them are boys, when the boys were doing well, they didn't want to be called patients. And then happily so a few of them got to be adults, and the adults didn't want to be called boys. So we were trying to figure out what do we call this group? So we started calling, and then we found some girls, which was fabulous, but unusual. So we started saying, well, what vocabulary are we going to use here? So we started using affected individuals, which is cumbersome, but that's the best we could come up with. Until we were at an international conference for our disease one year, and a little sibling came up and literally pulled the sleeve of our family services director and say, why do you say affected individuals? I'm affected too. And that was a real light bulb. And it's true. The siblings are affected too, and the grandparents are affected, and everyone's affected, and everyone can have a role, and everyone, is in this together. So I would encourage people to think of the greater family when you're thinking of these questions as well, not frankly, just the parents.
I had the pleasure of being at a Barth syndrome event this past weekend, and there was a family there that wasn't just a family. It was the mom, the dad, the boy, the affected boy, and his siblings. In fact, I think they had 2 affected boys. But there also was the godmother and her daughters and her boyfriend. And it was like this huge gathering of people around, the Barth syndrome boys in this family. And I think that just speaks to the ripple effect. We are unfortunately out of time. And I just want to thank you guys for one. There's a bunch of questions that we will pass on to you guys afterward and make sure that you get a chance to answer them in writing somehow or some other way. But I just want to thank you for sharing your stories, showing the differences, showing the commonalities. I think this is really useful. And I just wish we had like 3 more hours. So Nicole, I'm going to pass it to you.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I had a little tough time getting in, but I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Nicole White. I'm the Executive Director of Rare New England. I just wanted to thank Kevin for moderating this important talk, as well as Kate, Sanath, and Sarita for being a part of this. All of your stories are very empowering and inspiring, and we thank you so much for sharing your journeys. I also wanted to thank all the staff and everyone involved for making this conference possible. Continue our thanks to our sponsors, Ultragenics, Vertex, Horizon, Grail, Stealth Biotherapeutics, and Homology Medicines. And we hope that you join us for our next session, which is next Thursday, October 20th, from 12 to 1 again, where we will be discussing rare resources in New England. So we look forward to seeing you there, and be on the lookout for a survey that we'll be sending out soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.